There's a question I avoided for 34 years, not because I didn't know it existed, but because I had learned very early that some questions are dangerous. Not because they have bad answers, but because they have true ones. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 34 years old. I live in Chicago, the North Side, a neighborhood where the sidewalks are wide and lined with old oak trees that lose their leaves in October and don't get them back until April, and by then you've already forgotten what color they were. I own a dental practice on West Fullerton Avenue. I have a house with 3 bedrooms, one of which I've never furnished, and a wine cellar I started building when I was 32, because someone told me that's the kind of thing you do when you've arrived, when you've made it. I had made it, by every measurable standard, and I want to be honest with you about something right now. Before this story goes anywhere, making it and being whole are not the same thing. I know that sounds like something you'd read on a motivational poster in a therapist's waiting room, but I'm not saying it as a motto. I'm saying it as someone who spent the better part of a decade confusing the two. Someone who kept checking the list and thinking, well, the list says yes, so I must be okay. The list said, successful career, good income, attractive, educated, socially competent. The list said, nice apartment, good friends, family that cares, boyfriend who calls. The list said, everything is fine. And most mornings, I believed the list. But there were other mornings, the kind where you wake up at 5:15 without an alarm, and the apartment is still dark, and the radiator is clicking the way Chicago radiators click in January, metal contracting against cold, and you lie there in the gray-blue dark and you feel this thing that doesn't have a name. Not sadness, not loneliness, something more like distance, like you're watching your own life play out through thick glass, and you can see it perfectly, and it looks fine, and you cannot touch it. Those mornings, I would get up and make coffee and go to work, and be excellent at everything I did, and I would tell myself it was just tiredness, just the season, just the particular weight of February in a city where winter lasts too long. I was not tired. I was not listening to myself, and I want to tell you the story of the year I finally did. It was a Tuesday in February. Not a remarkable Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that exists only to be forgotten. Overcast sky, the color of old concrete, the smell of road salt and cold coffee, the particular Chicago wind that doesn't push you but leans into you like it's tired too. I had already seen 4 patients by noon. A routine cleaning, a crown replacement. A 9-year-old who cried, bravely, through his first cavity filling, and whose mother held his hand the entire time and whispered, "It's almost over, baby. Almost over." And I remember thinking, without meaning to, how it must feel to be held like that, by someone who means it completely. Maya appeared in the doorway of my office at 12:17. I know the time because I was checking the schedule on my laptop and the clock was in the corner of the screen, and afterward I kept returning to that number the way you return to the page where a story changed. She was wearing a deep burgundy blazer, the one that was slightly too big in the shoulders, so the seams fell just below where they were supposed to, giving her this particular quality of being both put together and at ease inside it, like someone who'd borrowed confidence instead of clothing. Her hair was down, which was unusual for a Tuesday. She was holding 2 cups of coffee from the place 3 doors down, the one with the broken espresso machine that still somehow made better drinks than anywhere else on the block. "You haven't eaten," she said. Not a question. She set 1 cup on my desk. "I had a bar," I said. "That's not eating. It has almonds in it." She sat down in the chair across from my desk, the patient chair, the one nobody sits in unless they're nervous. And she crossed her legs and looked at me with the specific expression I had come to recognize as, "I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm also not going to pretend you're right." "Your 2 o'clock canceled," she said. "You have 40 minutes. I have charts. The charts will be there in 40 minutes. I want to pause here, because I want to be honest about this moment." There was nothing unusual in what she said. We had conversations like this regularly. She looked after the operational efficiency of my practice with a precision I could not have replicated, and that included occasionally looking after me. It was professional care, the kind a good employee extends to an employer they respect. But something happened in those 15 seconds of silence after she spoke. The coffee was dark and steaming between my hands. The radiator in the corner of the office ticked. 1, 2, 3. The light from the window behind her was the flat white of a February Chicago afternoon, and in that light her face was very calm and very present, the way people's faces are when they are genuinely paying attention to you and not performing attention. And I thought, for one fraction of a second, the kind that leaves no evidence, when was the last time someone looked at me like that? Then I picked up my charts. I said, "I'll eat the sandwich from yesterday." She said, "That sandwich is from Monday and I already threw it out." I said something like, "Fine," and she left. And I sat in my office for a moment doing absolutely nothing and not understanding why. I didn't eat. I wasn't hungry anymore. I was feeling something that I didn't have a name for yet. Something small and lodged, like a splinter too deep to reach but too present to ignore. I went back to my charts, but I thought about that light on her face for the rest of the afternoon without meaning to. Here is what I knew about Maya Reeves before any of this began to matter in the way it would come to matter. I knew she took her tea, never coffee. Only at my office did she bring coffee, and only for me, with a half teaspoon of honey and no milk, and that she held the mug with both hands even when the tea wasn't particularly hot. The way some people hold mugs not for temperature, but for comfort, for something solid and warm to anchor them to the moment. I knew she kept a small notebook in the left pocket of whatever blazer she was wearing. A physical notebook, dark green with a worn leather cover, the kind you find in the stationery section of an independent bookshop. She wrote in it with a black rollerball pen, never pencil, and she pressed hard when she wrote, so that if you turned the page over, you could feel the indentations of the words from the other side. I had noticed this because once she left it on the front desk and I picked it up to move it, and felt the texture of her handwriting through the cover without meaning to, and I put it down faster than was necessary. I knew she laughed differently depending on what was funny. There was the short, involuntary laugh, the one that escaped before she could decide whether to let it. A single note, surprised out of her, that made her press her lips together immediately after, as if trying to retrieve it. And then there was the longer laugh, the one she allowed, that started in her shoulders before it reached her face. The second one was rarer and better. I knew she kept a small cactus on the corner of her desk, the kind called golden beryl, round and slow-growing and covered in golden spines that caught the afternoon light, and that she watered it exactly once a week on Wednesdays, and had named it Gerald, which she mentioned once in passing and never again, and which I remembered with more clarity than several actual important things I was told that same week. I knew she had a habit, when she was thinking, of tilting her head exactly 3 degrees to the right. Just 3. It was barely perceptible. I only noticed it because I had been watching her face when she was reading something without realizing I was watching. I knew the specific sound of her footsteps in the hallway, the rhythm of them, slightly quicker than average, the left foot landing softer than the right, and that I had begun, without entirely deciding to be aware of where in the building she was based on that sound alone. I knew she smelled like cedar, and something faintly sweet. Not a perfume exactly, more like the smell that belongs to a person, that comes from their skin and their soap, and some combination of their life that you can't buy in a bottle. I knew this because once, in November, she had reached past me to take a file from the cabinet behind my chair, and she was close enough that the sleeve of her blazer brushed my shoulder, and the smell reached me at the same moment, and I had held very still until she stepped back. I am telling you these things because I need you to understand something. I had no language for what I was doing. I was not, in my own understanding of myself at the time, a person who noticed these things about women. I had never, consciously named, noticed these things about a woman before, and so I filed each observation in a drawer I did not have a label for. And I told myself, "You're just detail-oriented. You've always been observant. This is what it means to know someone well." I was not detail-oriented in this way about anyone else. You already know that, but I didn't know it yet. And here is what I want to say directly to you, right now, if you're still with me. Have you ever felt this? This particular confusion of realizing you are paying far too much attention to someone without understanding why? This feeling of accumulating information about a person the way you accumulate something precious without understanding its value yet? Stay with me, because I need to tell you what happened next. You've already felt something, haven't you? That's why you're still here. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Thursday night in late March, in my living room, with a bottle of Malbec and a playlist neither of us was listening to. It had started as a working dinner. We occasionally did this, stayed late to go over billing, scheduling changes, the particular administrative architecture of running a small practice. I had ordered Thai food from the place on Clark Street, the one with the green curry that's always slightly too spicy and always completely worth it. And we had eaten at my kitchen table going over numbers, and then somehow the numbers were done and neither of us left. That was the first unusual thing. Normally when the work was done, Maya left. She was professional about it, not cold, just clear about the boundary. She would say, "I'll see you in the morning," and mean it and go. But that night she stayed, and I didn't say anything about it, and neither did she. We moved to the living room. The radiator had finally given up for the season. It was the last week of March, and Chicago had grudgingly admitted that spring was a possibility, though outside it was still 41 degrees, and the windows were dark and wet with condensation. I lit 2 candles on the coffee table, beeswax, the kind that smells like honey and warm wood, and poured the wine, and we sat at opposite ends of the sofa with our feet tucked under us, the way you sit when you've stopped performing comfort and are actually comfortable. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. A silence. Maybe 10 seconds. The candles moved. "Okay," I said. "Are you happy?" I had been asked this question before. My mother asked me a version of it regularly. Daniel asked it occasionally, with the hopeful intonation of someone who needed a particular answer. Friends asked it at brunch. In the abbreviated way, that means I'm asking because I care, but also I hope the answer is yes, because I don't have time for the alternative. Maya asked it the way you ask a question when you already suspect the answer isn't simple, and you're willing to sit with whatever complexity comes back. 15 seconds. The left candle flickered. "I don't know what that means," I said, which was not an answer, but was more honest than anything I'd said to anyone about this in years. She nodded. Once, like I had confirmed something. "I think you've been performing okay for so long," she said slowly, "that you've forgotten there's a difference between performing it and feeling it." I looked at her. The candlelight was amber, and she was very still, the wine glass resting on her knee, her eyes finding mine with a directness that made me want to look away, and impossible to look away. "That's a thing to say to your employer," I said. "You're not asking me to take it back," she said. I wasn't. I picked up my wine. The glass was cold and smooth. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. The playlist had cycled to something quieter. An acoustic guitar, clean and uncluttered, filling the space where we weren't talking. "I think I've been waiting for something to feel real," I said. I don't know why I said it, or rather, I do know. I said it because she had created a space where it was possible to say it, and my body moved toward that space before my mind had approved the decision. Not exciting, not extraordinary, just real, like it's actually mine. Maya looked at me for a long moment, not analyzing, just looking. "What does it feel like?" she asked. "The things that feel real." I thought about this seriously. The candles moved. "Right now," I said, and then I didn't finish the sentence. She didn't push. She just sat there, in the amber light, with the wine and the guitar and the condensation on the windows, and I felt, for the first time in I couldn't say how long, completely, quietly, terrifyingly present. We talked for another 2 hours. Not about work, not about the practice or the patients or the billing cycle. We talked about things I had not said out loud in years, maybe ever. The particular pressure of being the eldest child of a family that had invested their ideas of success entirely in your trajectory. The exhaustion of meeting expectations so consistently that people stopped checking on you because your okay was assumed. The specific grief of moving through a life that was built correctly and never quite fit. She told me things too, carefully, selectively, the way a private person offers information. She told me about her own years of translating herself for rooms that weren't designed for who she was. She told me about the first time she had stopped translating, and the relief and the terror of it, and how those two things could exist at the same volume simultaneously. I listened. I mean, really listened. The kind where you're not waiting for your turn. You're just receiving what someone is giving you. At 1:15 in the morning, she said she should go. I walked her to the door. She put on her coat, camel-colored, wool, with 2 buttons missing on the left side that I had noticed before but never mentioned. She picked up her green notebook from the entry table. "Sarah," she said, "just my name. No title, no doctor." "Yeah," I said. "You don't have to keep waiting for permission." She left. I stood in my entry hall for a moment with the door closed, and the candles still burning in the living room and the smell of beeswax and cedar in the air, and I understood, in a way I hadn't let myself understand anything in a long time, that something had shifted. Not dramatically, not with music or lightning, just a floorboard settling, just a question finally sitting down. I need to tell you something about where I came from, because I don't think the present makes sense without it. Not as an excuse. I've made my peace with the fact that none of this is anyone's fault, including mine, but as a map. Because we are all, to some degree, the accumulated result of the questions we were allowed to ask. I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, 30 miles west of Chicago, a suburb built on the idea of correctness. Correct houses with correct lawns and correct families, where the parents had correct jobs and the children went to correct schools and grew up to have correct lives. My father was an orthodontist. My mother taught 4th grade for 22 years and organized the church bake sale every October with a precision that most CEOs would envy. They loved each other in the steady, practical way of people who had chosen well and knew it. They were not unkind. They were not narrow-minded in the explicit, deliberate way. They were simply occupying a very specific shape of life, and it never occurred to them that other shapes existed, or that their children might need a different one. I was good at being the shape they understood. I was good at school. Not effortfully good, but genuinely engaged, particularly in science, particularly in the body's mechanics, the elegance of biological systems. I was good at piano until I wasn't interested in it anymore and stopped, which my mother took personally for about a year. I was good at being likable, easy to talk to, reliable, the kind of person teachers trusted with responsibilities and friends brought their problems to. I dated boys. Of course I dated boys. I dated them the way you go through the curriculum, diligently, with every intention of passing. I had a serious boyfriend in college, and I cared about him genuinely, and we were compatible in every demonstrable way. We had a relationship that made sense on paper, that my parents admired, that lasted 3 years and ended when he took a job in Seattle, and I wasn't sad enough about leaving. That should have told me something. After him, there was Daniel. Met at a conference, tall, charming, with opinions about wine and good taste in restaurants, and the kind of international career that made him seem perpetually slightly out of reach, which I had mistaken for mystery. We had been together for 4 years by the time this story begins, 4 years of transatlantic calls and occasional visits, and a relationship conducted largely in the space between presence and absence. He told me he loved me. I believe he did. In the way he was capable of. I told him I loved him too. And here's the thing I want to be honest about. I wasn't lying, but I also wasn't telling the complete truth. I was telling the truth available to me at the time, which was incomplete, because I was incomplete, because there were entire rooms inside me I had never opened the door to. I did not know this then. Or rather, I knew it the way you know a room is there without being willing to open the door. There's a difference between not knowing and not looking. I had been not looking for a very long time. My family had planned my future with the loving efficiency of people who believe there is one correct trajectory and that they are helping you stay on it. My mother had opinions about wedding venues in the abstract. My aunt sent me articles about fertility timelines with a kind of fierce tenderness that was genuinely meant well and landed like a clock ticking. My grandmother once told me, over Sunday dinner, that the most important decision a woman makes is who she builds her life with. And she looked at me with such specific hope that I smiled and said, "I know, Grandma," and helped clear the plates. I had been clearing plates for 34 years. And then Maya Reeves sat across from me in candlelight and asked me if I was happy. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I couldn't find the rehearsed answer. I want to say something directly to you now. If you're listening, and I think you are, because you're still here. I want to say, you don't have to have had an unkind family to have learned to disappear inside their expectations. Love can build a cage just as surely as anything else, if the love has a shape and you don't fit it perfectly. And the hardest part isn't escaping the cage. The hardest part is admitting that you've been inside one. Because admitting that means admitting that the people who built it did not entirely see you. And that is a grief all its own. I loved my family. I still do. And I had been carrying a version of myself they had never fully met. If this story is reaching you somewhere tender, maybe it's because it's speaking a piece of your truth too. You don't have to have the same story to recognize the feeling. Subscribe to the channel to hear more stories like this one, because you don't have to listen to this alone. April arrived slowly, the way spring arrives in Chicago. Tentatively, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, the oak trees on my street testing the temperature with small green buds that appeared and then waited, sensibly, before committing. Something had changed between Maya and me after that Thursday night, and neither of us named it. We didn't need to. It was there in the way we moved around each other in the office. A new grammar, slight and specific, made up of small adjustments. She started leaving my coffee on my desk before I arrived, instead of handing it to me directly. I started leaving the door to my office open in a way I hadn't before. Small things, the kind of things that only mean something if you're paying the right kind of attention. We developed a language of objects. I would leave a patient chart open on the corner of her desk when I needed her input on a scheduling complexity, and she would pick it up without being asked, add a note in her precise handwriting, dark green pen, slightly right-leaning letters, and leave it back in the same corner. If there was an afternoon that was running late, and the last patient was anxious, she would appear in the doorway with a small blue stress ball that she kept in her desk drawer and raise it once, silently, and I would nod, and she would walk it in and set it on the patient chair armrest without explanation. We had a shared reference, a misheard lyric from a song that played in the waiting room one afternoon in early April. I won't tell you which song. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we both heard it wrong in exactly the same way, and one of us said the wrong lyric aloud by accident, and the other one recognized it, and the whole thing was 2 seconds long and completely unremarkable to anyone present except us. And for the rest of the month, if either of us sang it quietly under our breath, the other one would start laughing before the second word. These are not dramatic things. I want to be clear about that. I am not describing a movie. I am describing a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and the accumulated Tuesdays and Wednesdays that quietly build something without announcing it. We went to the farmer's market on a Saturday in late April, which was not unusual. Several of us from the office went occasionally. It was a communal kind of outing, nothing special. But on this particular Saturday, it was just the 2 of us, because everyone else had canceled for reasons that felt slightly too coordinated to be coincidental. And we walked through the stalls in the early morning, when the air still had the cold edge that Chicago holds onto past the point of reason, and the light was low and yellow, and the produce was dark red and green, and the color of early things. She stopped at a stand selling dried flowers, bundles of lavender and chamomile, and something darker, almost brown, that I didn't know the name of. She picked up a bundle of chamomile and held it to her face, and inhaled without any self-consciousness at all, and then held it toward me and said, "Smell this." And I leaned in, and the chamomile was warm and sweet and slightly dusty, the smell of summer being promised in April. And we were very close for a moment, her hand holding the bundle steady, my face close to it, close to her. And then she pulled back and put it down, and we kept walking. I thought about that moment later. I thought about it more than was proportionate to what it was. We had lunch at a coffee shop nearby, the kind with mismatched wooden chairs and a chalkboard menu, and a cat that technically wasn't allowed in, but was there anyway, asleep in the window. We sat across from each other, and she ordered avocado toast, which she ate with more structural precision than I had ever applied to avocado toast, beginning at the corners, and I told her this, and she said, without looking up, Everything has a correct order. You just have to find it. And I wrote that down in my mind in the same place I kept all the other things about her. In the drawer without a label. At some point in the conversation, she said something. Not about me, about something else entirely. A story from her childhood, a detail about her grandmother. And she laughed, the good laugh, the one that started in her shoulders, and in the middle of it she looked directly at me. And I felt something so specific and so warm move through my chest that for a second I couldn't think clearly. I picked up my coffee cup. I looked out the window. The cat in the window shifted in its sleep. I filed the feeling in the drawer. The drawer was getting very full. From what city are you listening to me right now? Pause for a second. Think about where you are, on the bus, in your car, lying in bed with headphones on. I'm asking because this story doesn't belong just to me. It belongs to everyone who has ever carried a question without a name for too long. And if you're listening from wherever you are, I want you to know. I see you there. The moment happened on a Thursday. Not a special Thursday. 5:47 in the afternoon. The practice closed. The last patient gone. The waiting room quiet with that particular early evening stillness that settles over empty professional spaces when the workday is done. I was sterilizing instruments in the back room, a task I sometimes did myself, not because I needed to, but because I found the routine of it calming, the methodical process of it, the warm smell of the sterilizer, the way the work asked nothing of me intellectually and gave my mind room to drift. Maya had said goodnight 10 minutes earlier. I heard the front door close behind her. I heard the specific sound of her footsteps going, quicker, lighter on the right, down the front steps of the building. I was standing at the sterilizer with my back to the room when it happened. I don't know what caused it exactly. Maybe the specific quality of the silence after she left. Maybe the contrast of it, how full the room had been, with her in it, and how ordinary it was to be in that room before she worked here, and how I couldn't go back to that anymore. Maybe just the accumulated weight of the drawer, finally too full to ignore. I stopped what I was doing. I stood very still for approximately 30 seconds. I counted them, the way you count seconds when your heartbeat is doing something you're not sure about. And I thought, very clearly, a sentence I had not let myself think before. I want to be near her, not in a professional way, not in a she's a good colleague way, not in any of the ways I had been translating it. Just, I want to be near her. I put down the instrument I was holding. I stood there, the sterilizer hummed, the refrigerator in the break room clicked. Outside, a siren moved down Fullerton, Doppler shifting, coming and going, and then another thought, right behind the first. I think I always have. I drove home without the radio. I parked on my street and sat in the car for a moment looking at the lights in the houses around me. Amber through curtains, the blue flicker of a television, someone's kitchen bright and full of movement. And I felt something very large and very quiet settling over me. The way weather settles. Inside my house, I did something I hadn't done in... I genuinely don't know how long. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. Not to check my appearance, not to brush my teeth or wash my face. Just to look at myself, my face, 34 years old, Chicago, a dental practice on West Fullerton, a house with a room I've never furnished. I looked at myself for a long time, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5, and I thought, inside my own head, in a voice I recognized as mine but quieter than I usually allowed it to be, there is more of you than you have been showing anyone, including yourself. I didn't cry. I wanted to, maybe, but mostly I just looked. I stood there in the bathroom light, which was slightly too harsh and completely honest, and I looked at myself, and I let the question sit on the surface instead of under it. Who are you? When no one is expecting anything. I didn't have the answer yet, but I had asked it. For the first time. Out loud. Inside myself. And something about that, just the asking, felt like the first full breath in a long time. I want to tell you what I did at midnight. In the weeks that followed that Thursday, I want to tell you because I think maybe you've done something like it too. Or you're doing it now. Or you will. I'd lie in my bed with my phone under the covers, which is a ridiculous detail, the kind that makes me smile now, because I was hiding from no one. I live alone. There was no one to hide from. And I would search. carefully at first. Oblique searches, the kind you do when you're not ready to type the real thing. Late discovery, realizing something about yourself at 30, feeling like you've been watching your life from outside. These searches led to other searches. The algorithm, unhurried and entirely without judgment, began to offer me things: articles, essays, videos, testimonies. I read a piece by a woman who had been married for 12 years and had, at 41, understood something about herself that rearranged her entire past. She didn't write about it as a tragedy. She wrote about it as a translation, like she had been living in a language she had memorized but never truly spoken. And then someone handed her a text in her native language, and she understood it instantly, fully, in a way she had never been able to explain before. I read that piece 3 times. I found a forum, low traffic, plainly designed, the kind of online space that exists without advertising or algorithm or incentive, just people writing to each other at odd hours. I read threads by women who described, with a precision that surprised me, exactly the feeling I had been unable to name: the glass, the performance, the relationships that were correct by every external measure and somehow, privately, incomplete, the long bewilderment of not knowing why. One post, by someone with a username I've forgotten, written at 2 a.m. based on the timestamp, said this: I wasn't confused about what I wanted. I was confused about whether I was allowed to want it. I read that sentence and something in my chest went very still. I wasn't confused about what I wanted. I had been confused about whether I was allowed to want it. I kept the phone screen lit for a long time after that. The room was dark and quiet, and outside, it was May, and Chicago was finally keeping its promise of warmth. And through my window I could hear the last of the evening traffic on the avenue below and the very first birds of early morning. And I lay there and felt, for the first time, not alone in this specific way. There was language for what I was feeling. Other people had felt it, exactly this, and had found words for it, and the words existed, and now I had them too. I want to say something directly to you right now. If you have ever searched for something in the dark, at midnight, carefully, in the oblique way you search for things you're not yet ready to name, you are not strange. You are not late. You are exactly where you are supposed to be in your own process, and the language you are looking for exists, and you will find it. And when you do, the feeling of recognition is worth every searching night that came before. I called Daniel on a Sunday morning in early May. The cherry trees on my street had finally fully bloomed, a weekend late this year, the way Chicago spring is always slightly behind schedule, and I could see them from my kitchen window while the phone rang. Pale pink clusters that lasted exactly 2 weeks before they let go and drifted down to the sidewalk in slow, undramatic spirals. He answered on the 4th ring. He was in London. It was evening there. I could hear the specific ambient sound of his apartment, the click of a radiator, the muted city below. "Hey," he said. "I was just thinking about calling you. Can we talk?" I said, a pause. He heard something in my voice, I think. He said, "Yeah, of course. What's going on?" I had prepared what I wanted to say. I had written it down, not to read from, but to think with, to understand my own logic before I was asked to deliver it live. I wanted to tell the truth without making it a story about someone else. There was no one else to blame for what I had come to understand. Daniel had not done anything wrong. He had been exactly who he said he was. The problem, if problem is even the word, was that I had not been who I said I was. Not out of dishonesty, out of a long, accumulated, entirely well-intentioned failure to look. "I need to be honest with you about something," I said, "and I want to be fair, which means this is not a conversation about you. It's a conversation about me." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said, careful. I told him that I had been doing some difficult thinking, that I had come to understand something about myself that I should have understood sooner, and hadn't, and that the delay wasn't something I could apologize for exactly. You can't apologize for not seeing something you genuinely couldn't see. But that I was sorry for the time and care he had given to something that I hadn't been fully honest inside. I told him that what I'd felt for him was real, that I wasn't dismissing 4 years. but that I had been carrying an incompleteness I hadn't acknowledged, and that it wasn't fair to keep carrying it in his direction. I did not say Maya's name. This wasn't about Maya. Not at this stage. This was about me. He was quiet for a long time, maybe 30 seconds. Long enough that I counted. "Are you—" he started, and stopped, and then, "Is there someone else?" "No," I said, which was true, and was also not the whole truth, and was the closest I could get to being precise. "There's me. There's something I should have looked at a long time ago." He exhaled. Slow, deliberate, the sound of someone choosing not to say several things. "I don't fully understand," he said. "I know. I'm sorry." "Is this—" Another pause. "Is this the kind of thing that can be talked through, or—" "I don't think so," I said gently. "I think this is me needing to be honest with myself in a way I can't be while I'm in this." The cherry blossoms on the tree outside my window trembled slightly in a wind I couldn't feel from where I was standing. 2 of them let go and drifted down, pink and slow, out of frame. There's a difference, I've come to understand, between an incomplete truth and a lie. A lie is something you know is false and say anyway. An incomplete truth is something you say because it's all you can see from where you're standing, because the rest of it is in a room you haven't opened yet. I had not lied to Daniel. I had not been fully honest either. I had told him the truths available to me, and they had been too partial to build on. We talked for another 40 minutes. He was not cruel. I am glad to say that, not because cruelty was likely, but because these conversations can go in directions that leave damage, and this one didn't. He was confused and hurt in the specific way of someone who has been told the problem is not them and has to figure out what to do with that, and he was, I think, sad. I was sad too, for what had been real in it, for the years, for the particular grief of something ending not because it was bad, but because it was incomplete. When we hung up, I sat on my kitchen floor. The tiles were cold through my jeans, white ceramic, slightly uneven at the grout lines. The cherry blossoms kept doing their slow, patient thing outside. I had let go of something, and underneath the letting go, something else. Something quieter and larger. Permission. I want to tell you what it was like to be alone in my house after that, not alone sad. I want to be clear about that distinction, because I think it matters. There's the alone of something being missing, and there's the alone of a space finally cleared of something that didn't belong there. The second kind is strange and a little disorienting and, if you let it, clarifying in a way nothing else quite is. That evening, I moved furniture. Not all of it, just the chair in my living room, the big upholstered one in the corner that I had bought because it looked right in the catalog and had sat in approximately 6 times. I moved it to the other corner, which made no logical difference, but required effort, and the effort was what I needed. To do something physical, to feel the room respond to my decisions. I opened the window, the one that faces the back garden, narrow and long, still held onto the day's warmth. I made tea, honey, and no milk, which I noticed and didn't comment on to myself. I sat in the moved chair in the moved room, and I drank the tea, and I listened to the city. Chicago in May at 9 in the evening. The distant percussion of someone's patio music 2 buildings over. A siren, far away, moving east. Someone walking a dog on the alley behind my garden, their voice low and fond, saying something to the dog I couldn't make out but recognized in tone. The tone of speaking to something you love without needing it to respond. I thought about Maya's sentence, the one she'd said at my door weeks earlier. You don't have to keep waiting for permission. She had given it to me as a leaving gift, that sentence. Something I could take with me and use later. I was using it now. I sat in the chair until 10:30. Then I made a second cup of tea and went to bed. I read for 20 minutes, a novel I'd been meaning to start for 6 months, and fell asleep before I reached the end of the chapter. I slept like someone who had set something down. Are you still with me? Good. Because now comes the part I find hardest to tell. Not because it's painful. It isn't, mostly. It's difficult the way that beautiful things are sometimes difficult, because they're real, because you can't go back and live them again more slowly, and because you wish you could. I asked Maya if she wanted to have coffee on a Saturday morning in late May. Not at a coffee shop near the office. Somewhere new. I chose a place in the West Loop, the kind of neighborhood that had reinvented itself in the last decade. Old industrial buildings with wide arched windows now holding coffee bars and small restaurants. The place I chose was on the ground floor of a former warehouse. The ceiling was original concrete, the walls exposed brick still faintly warm with the color of old heat, and the morning light came in through the east-facing windows in long horizontal columns that moved slowly across the floor as the hour progressed. I arrived first. I got a table by the window. 2 chairs, a small round table, the wood dark and smooth with use. The coffee I ordered was a cortado, which came in a short glass. I wrapped both hands around it. Maya arrived at 10:12. She was wearing jeans and a dark green linen shirt. The first time I had seen her in something without structure, without the blazers and professional layers of the work week, and she looked, I'm going to say, like herself. More herself than I had seen her. The shirt was slightly wrinkled in the way linen is always slightly wrinkled, and the whole effect was of someone who had not dressed to perform anything for anyone. She sat down across from me and looked at me the way she always looked at me when something was happening that she was waiting to hear. Hi, she said. Hi, I said. 20 seconds. The coffee column of light moved. You have something to say, she said. Not a question. I have something to say, I confirmed. She ordered tea. Honey, no milk, which the server looked slightly uncertain about but went to find. She turned back to me with her hands folded on the table and her face open, the way her face was when she was entirely present. I had rehearsed this. I was going to say it cleanly and without making it dramatic. Here is approximately what I said. I ended things with Daniel about 2 weeks ago. I want you to know that the reason is not. It's not something that happened with you. It's something that happened in me. That's been happening in me for longer than I knew how to see it. I paused. But I know, that being around you, this year, in whatever way this year has been, it gave me a kind of permission to look at things I'd been not looking at. And I don't want to make this your responsibility. I'm not putting that on you. I stopped. She was quiet. Maybe 15 seconds. Okay, she said, careful and present. I want to tell you something, I said. And I want to say it simply, without making it more than it is, or less than it is. She nodded. I think you might be the person I feel most myself around, I said. The version of myself that I'm still figuring out. But that feels more true than the version I've been performing, and I'm not telling you that as a demand for anything. I'm telling you because I spent a long time not saying true things, and I've decided that's over. So, I picked up my cortado. That's the true thing. A silence. Not uncomfortable. The opposite of uncomfortable. A silence that had texture and weight, and its own kind of language. Maya looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked back up at me. Can I say something? She said. Yes, I said. I've been patient, she said, choosing the word carefully. I want you to know that the patience wasn't nothing. It wasn't me being indifferent. It was me being careful, because what I feel... She paused. The tea arrived. She waited until the server was gone. What I feel is not something I want to spend carelessly, and I needed to know that you were... Sure, I said. Yes, she said. Sure. I'm sure, I said. A pause. And then she laughed. The short laugh first, the involuntary one, the escaped one. And then the longer laugh, the shoulder one, the real one, and I laughed too. And the tension of the last 20 minutes left the room the way weather leaves after a long storm, all at once, and gently. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. We drank our coffee and our tea, and talked for another 2 hours about completely ordinary things. A book she was reading, a patient we both adored, the cactus on her desk that had developed a new spine formation she was monitoring with parental attention. And none of it was the confession, and all of it was, because the ordinary things felt different now that we were being ordinary in the correct context. I want to tell you what didn't happen next. There was no dramatic kiss in the rain. There was no moment of resolution with a swell of strings underneath it. We didn't hold hands across the coffee table and make promises with our eyes, while the city rushed past the window in romantic soft focus. What happened was, we paid the check. We put on our coats. We walked out onto the street, which was bright and ordinary and smelled of bread from the bakery next door, and the specific metallic warmth of Chicago pavement in May, and we walked south for a while without particular destination, not talking about anything significant, her shoulder occasionally near mine. At one point she stopped at a window display, a bookshop, a small independent one, and pointed at something on the lower shelf, a novel she said I needed to read, and she said it with the familiar confidence of someone who knows your taste well. And I said I'll add it to the list, and she said no, you won't, you never read the list, which was accurate. And I said I'll add it to the list and actually read it, and she said I'll believe it when I see it. That was the whole exchange. It lasted 45 seconds. It was the best part of the morning. I want to say this clearly because I think it matters. Real things are quieter than movies. Real things are a walk south on a Saturday and a stopped at bookshop, and I'll believe it when I see it. Real things are the absence of a dramatic gesture, replaced by the presence of actual ease. The ease of being with someone and not having to translate yourself, not performing the correct responses, not waiting for the feeling to arrive because it's already there, it's been there. It was there in the archive of small things I was keeping without meaning to. I am not sorry that my story doesn't have a cinematic peak. I am grateful for it. The peak would have been for someone watching. The walk was for us. I told my friend Diane 2 weeks later. Diane and I have been friends since dental school. She is an orthodontist now, practicing in Lincoln Park, and she is one of the few people in my life who has consistently refused to let me get away with the performance. She is direct in the particular way of people who love you enough to risk being unpopular with you, and over 17 years she has said several things to me that I didn't want to hear and was eventually grateful for. We met at her apartment on a Wednesday evening. She had made pasta, the good kind, from scratch, with a tomato sauce that had been simmering since 4 o'clock, and filled her kitchen with the warm smell of garlic and basil and summer being promised. We ate at her kitchen table and talked about ordinary things, and then I said, over the second glass of wine, I need to tell you something. She put down her fork. She looked at me, waiting. I told her everything, not all at once. It came in sections, the way things come when you've been holding them, with pauses where I needed to find the words. And she sat with the pauses without filling them. I told her about the year, about Daniel, and ending it, about Maya, and the Thursday with the candles, and the farmer's market, and the coffee on Saturday, about the midnight searches and the forum, and the woman who said I wasn't confused about what I wanted. I was confused about whether I was allowed to want it, about standing in front of my bathroom mirror. When I was done, Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Sarah. Yeah, I said. I've been waiting for you to get here for about 6 years. I stared at her. I didn't know that, I said. I know you didn't, she said. I'm not saying I knew better than you. I'm saying I noticed things, and I thought, she'll get there when she gets there. You never do well when someone pushes you toward something. You could have, I started. Could have what? Told you who you were before you knew it yourself? She picked up her wine. That's not how it works, and you know it. She was right. I knew it. I started crying somewhere around then. Not a dramatic cry, not the kind that asks for anything. The kind that comes when relief is too large to stay in your chest, the kind that says I was carrying this alone. And now I'm not. The tears were quiet, and Diane didn't move to comfort me dramatically, and I didn't need her to. She poured me more wine and said, "Eat your pasta," and I laughed through the crying and ate my pasta. She told me she was happy for me. She told me it made her, and she chose the word carefully, glad. Not in a sentimental way. In the specific way of someone who has watched a friend be smaller than themselves for a long time, and is relieved to see them take up the correct amount of space. She stayed there. Just there. That was enough. More than enough. You don't have to keep waiting for permission. I heard that sentence again, in a new context, and understood it differently now. Not just as permission to look at myself, permission to be seen. It's a Thursday morning in late June as I'm telling you this. The oak trees on my street have their full leaves, The deep, specific green of Chicago summer, almost too green, the kind of green you forget is possible during the gray months, and then remember suddenly and completely. The air smells like warm concrete and cut grass and something floral I can't identify from the open window of my kitchen. I am standing at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee, oat milk, Monday, and I am telling you this story because it is true, and because I believe true stories matter, and because somewhere right now there is someone listening who recognizes something in this that they needed to hear today. Maya and we are something that doesn't have a perfect word yet, which is fine. We are careful with each other, and honest with each other, and we are figuring it out, which is all anyone is ever doing. She still has Gerald the cactus on her desk. He developed 3 new spines this month. She showed me with a level of pride that I found disproportionate and entirely endearing. My mother and I have talked several times, and not all of them easily. She is trying. That's the most accurate thing I can say. She loves me in the way she always has, and she is being asked to expand her understanding of what that love contains, and it is hard for her, and she is trying. I have decided to receive the trying as the love it is. My family built me with love inside a specific shape. I am the same person they built. I am also more of her than they knew, and than I knew for a long time. Here is what I want to leave you with. I had a question I avoided for 34 years. Not because I didn't know it was there, but because some questions are only answerable when you've gathered enough of yourself to stand in front of them. There is no wrong time to do that. There is only the time when you do it, and everything that becomes possible after. I once stood in a bathroom in Chicago at 11:15 at night and looked at my face in fluorescent light and asked myself who I was when no one was expecting anything. I didn't have the answer then. I have more of it now, and I keep learning. I keep asking, and every morning that I wake up in a life that actually fits me, imperfect, unfinished, fully inhabited, I feel something I didn't have a word for until this year. I feel present. I feel like the glass is gone. I feel, finally, precisely, quietly, like myself. You don't have to keep waiting for permission. If this story touched something in you, leave me a comment. It can be one word, an emoji, a city. I read everything, and I know what it means to know there's someone on the other side listening. Subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this one. Stories of people asking the questions they were afraid to ask, and finding that the world keeps going, and that on the other side of honesty, something very quiet and very large is waiting. My name is Sarah. This is my story, and it is still being written.